we're gonna get started here. Since we're doing kind of a virtual and in-person part of this, I want to make sure that we're all set on that end. Jim, looks good. Okay, perfect. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming today. Really appreciate you coming and being in the air conditioning. Quite warm out. We got here. So I was happy that we were able to get a little bit of air in here too. So my name is Jennifer Dixon. I work with EGLE's Air Quality Division. We're here for the Marathon Detroit Permitting Project public meeting tonight. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of facilitating of the meeting, and we're also have a bunch of panelists. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how the meeting is going to be run, just to give you guys an idea of it. So if anybody has any questions in the beginning, let me know. So how are things going to work tonight? We started a little early because this project, if you know what's going on with it a little bit, or you kind of saw some of the information about it, it's complicated. So we wanted to make sure that we had enough time to talk a little bit about it, give you guys some information, and then be able to have plenty of time for questions from you all and answers from our panel. So that's why we started at 5:30. Normally we start at 6. The second part of the night, after we do like a little information session and question and answer, we're going to get into the public meeting. So the first part of the night is going to be dialogue, kind of back and forth, hopefully be able to answer some of your questions. The second part of the night is going to be the hearing. That's where we're going to take your comments on the record. So if you have questions during that time, we won't be responding to them. So just always want to remind everybody how the two parts of the night will work. Definitely go over that again once we get a little bit closer to it. Okay, so one of the things that we always talk about when we do, especially in-person public meetings, is just our group norm. So how do we want to interact with each other tonight? This slide was actually produced with our Flint Coalition partners. So we worked with the Coalition of Environmental Advocates in Flint to kind of put this together so that when we have public meetings, we're all being respectful. So these are just kind of our, rules of the night, I guess. So listen actively with an ear to understanding. That's really important. So if you have questions, that's going to be asking questions and requesting clarification when we get to that question and answer part. Criticize ideas, not individuals. So we just want to make sure that we're being respectful with how we're talking to you all and vice versa. Communicate respectfully, and then take space, make space. Do people know what take space, make space, kind of what I'm talking about when I say that? It's okay if you don't. Basically, it just means we want to make sure that everybody in the audience, everybody online has an opportunity to ask questions and get answers, and we're not, having one person dominating the conversation and doing stuff like that. So we want to have a lot of people here with hopefully a lot of great dialogue. That's really, really important. Okay, so I want to take you through a little bit of the agenda. The first thing that I'm going to do is introduce my air quality staff, but Annette, I want to introduce you first. So Annette Switzer is our air quality division director, and she's the decision maker. So she's going to give you guys a little bit of a welcome to the mic. So on mic.
Thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, I'm Annette Switzer, the air quality division director. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here tonight. I know we all have a lot going on in our lives, so being here tonight, I'm sure it's important to you to hear more information, ask questions, or be able to potentially comment on the proposed permits that we're talking about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. Again, really appreciate you being here, and we're going to move on with the rest of the agenda.
Thanks, Annette. So the rest of the folks here, what I'm going to do is introduce EGLE staff that I have kind of out in the audience, just so everybody knows who's here, and then we'll get to our panelists. So if I say your name, can you just raise your hand so people know if you have questions and you want to have one-on-one conversation with any of our staff? I'm happy to do that too. So Jeff Korniski is in the back here. He's our assistant manager in our Detroit district office. And then I'm going to kind of just look in the audience. We have Kate Hutchins from our environmental justice office and Regina Strong, our environmental justice public advocate. Susan Kilmer, she's in our air monitoring division. So she works with the stationary air monitors, things that measure air quality in the outdoor air and where you're breathing in the breathing zone. I also have Lisa Heron. She's our community outreach specialist, and Jim Ostrowski. He's our environmental support division and training and outreach manager. He has a very long title. Sorry about that, but they're helping with like the tech stuff on the back end so that folks online can participate in the meeting. And then we have another staff person, Caitlin DeVries, that's helping online. So our panelists, one of the main people that you're going to hear from tonight is Andy Drury. So Andy is a permit engineer on this project. So basically, he kind of handles making sure that all the applications were reviewed in a specific kind of way. So he's going to be talking to you in the information session, giving you some more pieces and details of what went into his review. Steve Weiss works with Jeff Korniski. He's the inspector for Marathon. So he's going to have a lot of information about compliance activities, inspections, what he does in his role as an inspector. Mike Deppa is our toxicologist. So he also is making sure that all of the toxics that were part of this application were reviewed properly. And then we have Stephanie Hangspot. She was our air modeler. So air modeling is, when you'll hear a little bit more about this, but just to give you a little bit of a preview, it's a computer model that's used to kind of look at what the emissions, the releases of pollutants would be and how they may impact folks in the area. So her job is really important because this is a pre-construction kind of thing. These activities that Marathon wants to do haven't happened yet. So we use Stephanie to kind of look into the future to see what might happen if these were approved. So her job is really important as well. So thanks staff for being here. Appreciate that. Want to just remind everybody, information session. So you'll hear from Andy, you'll hear from Steve. We'll get right into that question and answer session. So if you have questions, feel free to jot them down. And we'll get to that later. We're also going to be popping back and forth with our folks online in case anybody online has any questions as well. After that, we'll get to that public hearing. So reminder, that's where we'll take your comments on the record, but we won't be responding to questions. Sometimes people ask questions in their comments. That's completely fine to do, but we just can't respond to them at that time. After the hearing closes, I'll just go over briefly other ways that you can submit a comment. So you don't have to submit a comment tonight. The comment period is extended until June 3rd. So you don't have to submit a comment tonight if you don't want to, if you're not ready. We're happy to take your comments, but we'll also take them after the evening as well. We'll talk a little bit more about where you can find more information. If you want more information, you want to dig a little deeper into this. And then we'll give you some contact information for the folks that you heard from tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Andy. And he's gonna get us started. Yep, I'm gonna turn this one off so we don't spoil. And then Jim, while we're waiting, how many folks do we have online right now?
We have 9 people online.
Okay, perfect, thanks. You want, I don't know if you want that or not.
I'll use it. I'll run my slide. Are we? There we go. All right, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? All right, so as Jen said, my name's Andy. I'm the lead permit engineer for the Detroit permitting project, and I'm the one who did most of the review for the air permit applications, and I worked with some of our other air quality staff in that review as well, like Jen said. And before we get to details of the project, I want to talk a little bit about what the air quality division does and how the permitting process works. And as we know, air pollution comes from many different sources, like power plants, fuel burning vehicles, industrial sources. And the mission of the air quality division is to protect human health and the environment and we do that through our authority under state and federal laws through regulating industrial sources. So AQD staff, we do a lot of different things. We monitor levels of air pollutants, examine toxic air contaminants to make sure public health is protected, do inspections of sources like the refinery, that's what Steve does, review applications for different projects to make sure and write permits for them, make sure the air pollutants that they want to emit comply with the state and federal rules designed to protect public health. So our rules require us to issue permits for sources of air pollutants, but there are a few things that we can't consider when we review an application and that the draft permit does not cover. So things like zoning and noise and traffic on public roads, we have no authority over that. So you want to talk to your local government if you have concerns or questions about that. And while what the residents think about a project is important, we can't, when we're making a decision on an application, consider whether the residents want that project to happen or not. And while whether a project is needed or not is also important, it's not something that we can consider when we make a decision on the air permit application. Our decision is based on whether or not what the company wants to do can comply with the air pollution rules and regulations. If the project will comply with those rules, we have to issue the permit. So to make sure a company is meeting all the rules and regulations, they need to file a permit to install. So I'll give you a little rundown of how the air permitting process works. So the first step is the company decides they want to do something that needs an air permit. install something, construct something, make a modification to something they have. And then they submit the application to us, put the application together and send it in to us. So then it goes to an engineer like myself to review the application to decide if what they want to do can meet the state and federal air rules and regulations. During that review, other staff are involved as well to address their areas of specialty. And this includes reviewing the toxic air contaminants, the TAC emissions, to make sure they comply with the health-based screening levels. If all the rules are met, then the engineer drafts a permit. And part of the process is if a public comment is required, like today, then we put that draft permit out for the public to comment on. And public comment is a very important part of the permitting process, because the comments that we get can make it influence the decision that we make. And once the comment period ends, we review all the comments that we've received. And like I said, they can lead to changes in the permit conditions and the final decision that we make. And then at the end of the process, the decision maker makes a decision on the permit application. The decision can be to issue the permit as it was drafted, issue the permit with changes, or to deny the permit if we determine it won't meet the rules and regulations. But that's what the decision is based on. Can what they want to do meet the air quality rules and regulations? So for the Detroit permitting project, it's a little bit complicated. So why do we have 3 applications? The refinery is a single facility that takes crude oil, refines it into various products, and then sells those to customers. But there are separate companies that own and operate different parts of the facility. And each company is legally responsible for their emissions. So the Detroit permitting project affects equipment owned by 3 different companies. These are Marathon Petroleum Company LP, we're going to refer to them as Marathon. Air Products and Chemicals Incorporated, I'll refer to them as Air Products. And then MPLX Terminals LLC, Detroit LP Terminal. And we refer to them as MPLX. So most of the Detroit permitting project changes affect Marathon. And so Marathon is asking to remove some throughput limits on several storage tanks, to remove a calendar year average limit on crude oil, to increase the number of coker cycles that are allowed in a 12-month rolling time period. And these changes are to allow the refinery to operate at its full capacity. These changes are described in more detail in the technical fact sheet. So what is throughput? Throughput is the amount of something that's allowed to go through a process, like the amount of crude oil that's allowed to go through the crude oil tanks at Marathon. And what is a coker drum? A coker drum converts heavy oil and heats it up and converts it into lighter material that can go back into the refinery to be used to make further products. And when they do that, it also produces petroleum coke as a byproduct. So Marathon's also proposing 4 emission reduction projects to make up for the emission increases that could happen from these throughput changes. The products are to replace the naphtha hydrotreater heaters with new heaters that have ultra low NOx burners. So the naphtha hydrotreater process is a process that takes sulfur out of this naphtha product stream that they make. And it's important to take the sulfur out because when that naphtha goes into gasoline or something, and you burn it in your car, EPA has regulations on how much sulfur can be in that fuel when you burn it. They're going to take the crude flare out of service, add a dome to an existing external floating roof storage tank for a gasoline storage tank, and increase their or expand their leak detection and repair program. So these changes are also described in more detail in the technical fact sheet. Marathon has also requested to add enforceable emission limits to limit emissions from the equipment affected by the Detroit permitting project. These limits would replace higher limits from an earlier project that have expired. And these limits apply to the combined emissions from Marathon and from Air Products. Marathon's also proposed to extend their perimeter air monitoring for 3 years and to add some language from an EPA enforcement action that has not been put in their permit yet. And it should be there. So as I said, there are 3 companies affected by the project, and the hydrogen plant equipment owned by Air Products could have emission increases due to the Detroit permitting project. So Air Products is also asked to add these emission limits to their permit. And these limits are the same ones Marathon's getting, and the limits apply to the combined emissions from Marathon and air products. MPLX is requesting to increase the height of the stack on their vapor recovery unit. So what is a vapor recovery unit? MPLX, they load tanker trucks with gasoline so that that gasoline can go to gas stations so people can buy it. And when they fill the trucks with gasoline, that generates gasoline vapors that come out. And you notice that when you fill your car, you know, nowadays, most cars have onboard vapor recovery, so you don't get the gasoline fumes coming out. So it's very important when they fill the trucks that they don't have those gasoline fumes. So the vapor recovery unit collects those emissions, recovers most of that gasoline and puts it back into a storage tank so they can use it again. But part of the emissions, what's left over, goes out through the stack, and that is what the VRU stack is. So I talked about some of the specifics of the project. So let's talk about how we review a permit application. So when reviewing a proposed project, the AQD permit engineer, as I said before, works with other air quality staff. Our review includes a review of the regulations, the state and federal rules that apply to the project. We review the proposed emissions and compare those to what the rules and regulations allow. Part of that review is verifying the emission calculations that have been done. And our toxics review to make sure that the toxic air contaminants meet Air Quality Division's health waste screen levels. And we also do air modeling for criteria pollutants, which I'll talk about soon, and toxic air contaminants when that's required. So the bottom line is that we need to know if Marathon's operating at their full capacity all the time would meet the rules and regulations. So what pollutants are released? The refinery emits a variety of air pollutants. This includes criteria pollutants, which is a small group of well-studied and regulated pollutants. For this project, we looked at several of the criteria pollutants, including sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and fine particulate that we call PM 2.5. EPA sets national ambient air quality standards for these criteria pollutants to protect public health and the environment. And I know you've heard about ozone. That's one of the air quality standards that EPA has set. There are also hazardous air pollutants. It's another set of pollutants that are known to cause health and environmental effects. EPA has regulations for hazardous air pollutants, including some regulations that apply to the Marathon Refinery. And this project does not change how these rules apply to Marathon, and they will have to continue to comply with these rules if the permit is issued. And we also review toxic air contaminants, which is a larger group of pollutants that is covered by air quality rules, Michigan rules. They include almost any pollutant that is not a criteria pollutant, including the hazardous air pollutants. And our rules allow our toxicologists to set health-based screening levels for toxic air contaminants. So the throughput limits that Marathon wants to remove are monthly average limits on the daily amount of product that goes through several of their storage tanks, and the annual average limit on the daily amount of crude oil that is allowed through their crude oil storage tanks. They're also asking to increase the number of coker drum cycles over a 12-month rolling time period, which is 12 months goes, January to December, and then February to January, and like that. So these limits that they want to get rid of do not restrict the refinery's short-term operation. So removing these limits will not cause an increase in short-term emissions like pounds per hour or pounds per day or pounds per week. So Marathon is currently allowed to operate at their full capacity as long as they comply with those monthly and annual average limits. And this is very important because some pollutants have short-term health waste standards. There is a short-term limit on the amount of coke that they can produce, and that limit is not changing. The throughput limit changes could increase the monthly and annual emissions if Marathon operates at their full capacity more than they do now. Because right now they're allowed to operate at full capacity for a time period, and then they will have to reduce operation to meet that annual average limit for crude oil. And it's important that there may be long-term emission increases because some air pollutants have long-term health-based standards. Marathon's emission reduction projects reduce short-term emissions from the new heaters compared to the old heaters, except for carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide could increase. We reduce the short-term emissions from the crude flare because it's going to be taken out of service. Reduce the short-term emissions from the gasoline tank that's going to get the dome and reduce short-term equipment leaks. And except for carbon monoxide, these projects will also decrease the long-term emissions. So the carbon monoxide increase comes because of these ultra-low NOx burners that Marathon would have on these new heaters. So the NOx could be reduced by up to 33.7 tons per year, depending on how much they operate. But doing that could increase CO emissions by up to 3.8 tons per year. And so this is an environmentally beneficial trade-off because the NOx emissions contribute to ozone formation. And carbon monoxide levels in the area are way below the health-based standards. So a small increase in carbon monoxide is not going to cause any health problems. A reduction in NOx emissions could reduce ozone levels. So this table, it's got a lot to it. It's a summary of table 1 in the technical fact sheet, which we have a few copies out there and it's also online. It shows Marathon's projected emission increases without the emission reduction projects. And these numbers were calculated following the AQD rules. And they show that the project will not trigger PSD or a non-attainment new source review. The 5.9 ton per year carbon monoxide increase, that includes the 3.8 tons that could be increased from the new heaters. So you can look at table 1 in the fact sheet to get some more details on this. This table shows the expected changes in emissions for Marathon's emission reduction projects. And it's important to note that these reductions are not required for the throughput changes to comply with the air quality rules and regulations. And because of that, we did not include these reductions in our review of the permit application, except for the increase in carbon monoxide. We did include that in our review. So there's more details on this in the technical fact sheet. This table is from figure 1.1 of Marathon's permit application that shows how Marathon expects the emissions to change as a result of the project compared to past emissions, including the emission reduction projects. And this shows that Marathon expects reductions in most of the pollutants. So the AQD rules require calculations to be done in a specific way, and that often results in higher estimated emissions than actually occur, which is why table 1 shows increases in emissions. But this table here, it's for information only. It's not for regulatory purposes. We have not used any of this information in our review because it was not done according to the way our rules work, but it is what Marathon expects will happen going forward. So I'll talk a little more in detail about toxic air contaminants and their health-based screening levels. The screening levels are designed to protect against health issues like developing cancer or breathing problems. When we perform our review, we look at all toxic air contaminants that could be emitted and compare them against the health-based screening levels, often using computer dispersion modeling. An AQD review of the toxic air contaminants included virtually every emission source at the refinery, and it's based on the maximum hourly emission rates. And as discussed in the project summary and fact sheet, with a taller vapor recovery stack, our review determined the emissions would comply with the health-based screening levels. And so what is modeling and why is it important to the review of a permit application? Computer modeling predicts what concentrations neighbors could be exposed to under worst case scenarios from the facility. The modeling simulates a grid of virtual air monitors all around the facility, which allows us to evaluate the highest concentrations that could occur. The modeling for this project was done for toxic air contaminants, looking at the maximum hourly emission rates from all of the equipment operating all at the same time. And the annual criteria pollutant emissions could increase as a result of this project, so we modeled those changes as well. The modeling showed that all the toxic air contaminant emissions meet the health-based screening levels, and that the increases in criteria pollutants are less than the significant impact level, which is kind of a minimum level that EPA has established. If you have emissions under that level, there's no impact expected on the criteria pollutant concentrations in the area. So there would not be any issues with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So what is a permit? As we were talking with some other people, a permit is a legally enforceable document with a list of requirements the company has to comply with. These requirements in the permit ensure the equipment operates the way that it was described in the application and the way that we reviewed it. The existing permits for the refinery have requirements such as emission limits that restrict the amount of emissions they can have, limits on the type and amount of fuel that they can use. There's requirements to have their various pollution control devices installed and maintained and operating properly. There are testing requirements that lay out what pollutants have to be tested for, the test methods they have to use, and how often those tests have to be done. There are monitoring and record-keeping requirements, including a lot of monitoring of pollution control devices, monitoring for continuous emission monitors of their monitoring and record-keeping on production, how much fuel they use. There are reporting requirements in the permit as well, quite a lot of them. And the requirements of EPA's refinery regulations I mentioned earlier, those are also included in the permit. The proposed permit contains most of the same requirements that are in the current permit. They allow the storage tank throughput limits, those have been removed. The number of coker drum cycles has been increased as requested. The new lower emission limits that Marathon asked for have been included. And one note on those, if the permit is issued, those limits will apply immediately. So that's important to know. The emission reduction projects are also required to be done in the permit. While these projects are not required for the throughput changes to meet the air quality rules and regulations, Marathon has asked that they be put in the permit, and we've put them in the permit. So Marathon is required to make these reduction projects happen. There are emission limits and other conditions for the new heaters because they will have emissions, and so they have to be, there are limits, there's testing for those. These emission reductions are required to be in place by December 31st of 2025. And the permit also has the ambient air monitoring continuing for 3 years after the permit is issued, if it's issued. There's a detailed list of the changes to the current conditions that's included in the technical fact sheet. We have a few of those out on the table. It's also available on our website. So one important question people may have is, why are these throughput changes allowed before the emission reductions are made? The main reason is that these throughput changes comply with the air quality rules and regulations without the emission reductions. And we did not account for these reductions in our review of the permit. So none of the modeling, evaluation, toxics evaluation, none of that accounts for these reductions. We did, as I said before, include the increase in carbon monoxide emissions in our review. So that is my part. Now I'll turn it over to Steve. He is the inspector for the facility. And he can tell you what he does.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah,
You got it.
do it the old fashioned. Maybe I will.
You should just be able to use the arrows. Is it not working? You might have to click on the screen.
There you go.
Yeah. I have a question.
There we go.
Oh. Can you hold on for just 1 second, or is it related to something that Andy just talked about?
Oh, we talked about a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
A lot of questions, that's our, we're gonna take questions.
Yeah, we're gonna go question.
Yeah, he's got a couple of slides.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, I'm Steve Weiss. I'm the district inspector for the Marathon facility. I work in the Detroit district office, which covers facilities in Wayne County. So I'm going to talk about the role that district staff serve in terms of determining compliance with the company and their permit. So Marathon is classified as a major source of air pollutants, which is nothing surprising given the size. And a lot of facilities around the state in Wayne County are considered major sources. And with EPA's compliance monitoring plan in the states, typically those sources are inspected once every other year. Marathon's in a special classification based on the size, complexity, the amount of emission units, you can even say the acreage, where they actually get inspected more frequently. In our district, the steel mills are that way, Fort Dearborn complex is that way. Marathon has that classification. What that means is that facility is required to be inspected at least twice every calendar fiscal year. I'll wait for
K1,
Steve.
K1, please come to the front desk with all your belongings.
just check.
10-year-old.
Oh, is it?
Okay.
Thank you.
So Marathon's required to be inspected twice, at least twice every calendar year portion of the land. So what does that inspection involve? It really, the basis is the permit itself. Facilities that have permits, I mean, you just heard from Andy's presentation, all that goes into a permit review. We consider the state regulations, federal regulations, air toxics, health-based screening levels. All that goes in the permit review. And for facilities big like Marathon, that's a multi-page permit, even a small facility has maybe a 2-page permit. That permit serves as a great resource and a great summary of the regulatory requirements for a facility. So that is the basis of the inspection. I will spend most of my time actually going over the permit requirements with facility staff And they'll be required to demonstrate how they keep track. And Andy showed the different parts of a permit. You have the emission limits, material limits, testing, record keeping. That's really the bulk of the inspections, having the facility go through and show me how they maintain and demonstrate compliance with those permit requirements. The second one is stack testing. This is not Marathon on the picture. It's actually a facility in Wayne County. But a stack test is what it sounds like. You actually test the emissions being emitted to the ambient air, the air that we all breathe and share from a process. Could be a boiler, could be a heater through a stack. This particular picture is actually of a heater. It might be hard to see. You can kind of see the stack test personnel putting the measuring device into the stack. And the role that AQD plays is to make sure that the test is done according to protocol. Now, what I mean by that is facilities can't make up how they test, let's say for nitrogen oxides or particulate. Every facility uses long-established, tried and true reference test methods put forth by EPA. So there's test methods for nitrogen oxide measurement, for particulate measurement. Even looking at the picture, the way that probe is actually put into the stack, there's actually a test method to show that's put in the right place with the right type of flow and done representatively. So that's the role AQD plays. Marathon tests a lot. I mean, they tested last week, they're testing this week, I'll be there tomorrow, they're testing next week. So I'll give you an example about tomorrow's test. Tomorrow Marathon is testing what's called the fluidized cracking unit charge heater for VOCs, volatile organic compounds. So what role did AQD play in this? Well, when Marathon was proposing this test, their test consultant, the test contractor, sent a letter to AQD on Marathon's behalf saying, hey, we're going to test the fluidized charge heater on this date for these pollutants. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to use these test methods. We're going to handle the samples this way. We're going to actually calculate this way. We have a group within AQD. It's called the Technical Programs Unit. And there's a group within that group that only focus on stack testing. So their job is to look at things like these test protocols and make sure that what's being presented by the company is consistent and accurate, using the right test methods and the right analysis, and that the emission reports are done the right way. So when Marathon sent the letter in saying this is what we're going to do on this date in May, the Technical Programs Unit staff would review that and say, okay, here's an approval letter saying we agree with the methods you're going to use, the way you're going to do it, how you're going to present the results, and that's how we give the approval. Now, the test itself will get test results from the company. It'll also be reviewed by the Technical Programs Unit and myself. And we try and get to as many tests as we can in person as well. That's why I'll be there tomorrow. So that's how the stack testing works. And the last one is report reviews. This picture I took in our office. This is actually one of, by my count, 26 similar drawers of records in Marathon. And that's just our active records with, I think, some we sent to archive as well. And Marathon sends records. I'm going to read these because there's quite a few they sent. Things like quarterly continuous emission monitoring, downtime and excess emission reports, quarterly leak detection and repair for their pumps, valves, compressors, drains, connectors, quarterly fugitive and wastewater volatile organic compound emissions, quarterly benzene waste report, quarterly renewable operating, semi-annual renewable operating permit compliance reports. All these reports are sent to the district staff, myself, and they're reviewed by myself, Technical Programs Unit staff for accuracy and completeness, and also for compliance with permit requirements or regulatory requirements. Now, any non-compliance found during these compliance activities, it could be during the inspection itself, during the stack testing results, during the report review. Any issues you might find of non-compliance, we'd issue a violation notice to the company, which they'd have so many days to respond to and develop a compliance plan to address that. And all this information that we discussed, a lot of it is going to be on our website currently. You can actually find all the stack test plans and test results. You can find violation notices and orders. You can find the reports of the inspections on there as well. All that's online for you to check out. I know further down, we're gonna have a slide with all of our contact information. So any questions at all about the facility's compliance or what we do when we go in the field, if you have complaints about odors, please feel free to contact me or the district. We'll get back with you as soon as we can. Again, any questions are welcome. Jenna, back to you.
Thank you. All right, well, thanks to Steve and Andy. I'm gonna take this out because we're gonna get into the question and answer part. So hold on.
Back on.
For you guys to pass the line when you need it. All right, so. All right, I'm actually gonna skip this slide for now because I know you guys have questions. We want to get to the question and answer part, but I'll come back to that slide to talk a little bit about public comment before we get into the public hearing portion of the night. So I know Steve talked really fast. Did anybody else think Steve talked really fast? I did too.
Steve does too.
Steve talked very fast. So, and Andy gave us a lot of information. So I know you had a question on, I'll get to you first if you don't mind. So just a little bit about how this part of the night is going to run. We want to try to be done with Q&A around 7, and that's just so that we have plenty of time to take as many comments as we can. We do have to be out of this building at a certain time. So we want to try to be done with comments if we can by around 8:30. So I'm saying around because I want to make sure that we're being flexible. Because they want us out in the parking lot at 9 o'clock, we were told. We are not allowed. Last time we stretched it a little bit and they didn't like that. So they're like, you got to get out. But I want to make sure that we have as much time to ask and answer questions as we can. So 7-ish sound good to everybody to try to shoot for. I think that gives us about an hour, Jim. Are you looking at time? Okay, perfect. Okay, so a little bit less than an hour. All right, so what I'm gonna do is, if you guys can raise your hand and we're gonna get to this young lady first. And then I'll pass it over to the panelists, but I'll come to you with a microphone to ask your question and then, make sure you have an opportunity for follow-ups if you have anything that you want to add or anything like that. So, all right, without further ado. Okay, I'll have the mic.
Well, I've got a bunch of questions because you laid out a whole lot of information and I'm not a technical expert in this area. So I'm trying, so it sounds like Marathon wants to increase its production and they're going to do that by eliminating these limits on throughputs. I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what that means, but there's more material coming through there and there's, they're producing more stuff. So, so I have a bunch of questions. One is, you said this pet coke is produced in the process. What happens to the pet coke and do we know where that is? Is that going in our community? What is happening with, what happens with pet coke that's produced?
Okay, let's start there. So I don't know, Steve, do you know? I think you would be the best bet to know where that pet coke goes.
To my knowledge, it is actually shipped overseas for use. It's not stored in Detroit anymore than I know of. It used to be by the riverfront years ago. There was a controversy back around 2011, 12. That's long been resolved and it's not being stored there anymore. I can find out exactly if you want an exact spot where it might be stored prior to final shipping.
Yeah, I mean,
We
we're
can get
concerned
back-
about what comes out the stacks, but we're also concerned about like what else is there and if it's coming out of that facility and it's getting shipped overseas, is it on trucks or trains? How is it leaving that facility and traveling through our community? Those are important questions for us.
Okay, yeah, sure.
We
So
can
Steve,
definitely
are
find
you?
that out, yeah.
Okay, thank you. If you don't mind taking a note of that. and
Yeah,
then-
absolutely.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
The next question is, you mentioned the height of this stack, increasing the height of the stack. Can you explain the importance of that and, what does that do?
Yeah, Andy, if you want to talk a little bit more about the increase in the stack, if you want to go back to a slide, you can. I don't know if we have,
I've got a few slides.
oh, okay, your extra
So-
slides.
Yes, right, so let me zip through here and find where those are at. Okay, oops. All right, so the stack has to do with modeling of gasoline emissions. So this is figure 2 in the fact sheet. And it shows the gasoline impact, the ambient concentration that we modeled with their current stack height.
So Andy, just to let you know, on your clicker, there is a laser pointer. If it's that's
Okay, red
to show what you're talking about.
Right there, okay, right there. So that 20, that is the health-based screening level that's allowed for gasoline in the ambient air that's not like on an industrial property or a public roadway. And as we can see here, this area right here extends beyond the roadway. So with their current stack, when we did the modeling, that area does not comply with a health-based screening level. So the solution to that, I don't want this one yet. All right, so this is with their stack increased. So we can see that area that was out beyond the edge of the roadway now is on the roadway. So now those emissions, and this is based on their allowed maximum emissions. So that area now complies with our health-based screening level, that number of 20. And that 20 is all of the gasoline emissions from the entire refinery combined. So we modeled every gasoline emission source at its maximum emission rate, and that's what that is.
Can I just follow up, because I'm making sure I understand this all. Is there like a single stack that this is coming out of? You're talking about increasing the stack.
Yeah, so yeah, let me
Or are there
explain.
multiple sources of gasoline emissions?
Yeah, so there are storage tanks down here that emit gasoline. There are other tanks in this area that emit gasoline. So we modeled all of those different pieces. And when Marathon's consultants did that modeling, they identified that that vapor recovery unit stack, if they make that taller, that's sufficient to get the impact of the emissions under that screening level. So, I mean, there could have been other things that they chose to do. One thing that's happening is one of the gasoline storage tanks is gonna get a dome on it. And that's gonna decrease the gasoline emissions from that tank by 3.5 tons per year. But that's not happening right now, so we didn't count that. We did not include that in our evaluation. I'm showing this next slide. So this is permit 6308 from back in 2012, 2014. I'm not sure when that was.
2008, they said.
Well, yeah, that was, the initial permit was 2008. We had some updates for that permit. So this is the same gasoline modeling that we did for that permit. And you can see all of that area inside the blue. And I apologize, we don't have this electronic anymore, so I had to scan it and draw a line. I'm not an artist, but back then, those same emissions complied with our screening order. And the only thing that has changed over that time, in 10 years or so, is that, and if we need to, Stephanie can talk about that, is the EPA has updated their modeling program. They're always trying to make it better. And weather data has changed. We typically use about, was it 1 year? 1 year of weather data when we do the modeling. So, you know, weather data changes, and so that's what happened. They haven't increased emissions or anything. It was just the modeling predicted that increase, and so they are gonna raise the stack. And I also want to show this one. I think that this may not be in the fact sheet. So this, you can see that area is much farther in from the edge of the road. So all we did in this modeling run is Marathon has, or MPLX has a limit of 7.5 milligrams per liter of gasoline loaded, or per milliliter of gasoline, yeah, or 1,000, whatever. The limit is 7.5, that's the key thing. And so that's what we modeled in that first slide. They routinely have to test this. And their tests are usually around the 1 milligram level, while the emission limit is 7.5. So we reran the model at 2. And so that shows you more of what the actual emissions are. So we have to evaluate allowed emissions, and this is only changing the vapor recovery unit emissions. So this is more what the actual emissions are. We didn't change anything else to be more representative of actual emissions. Everything else is based on the maximum emissions. So does that help answer the question?
I think so. And so, and the other, yeah, it's confusing. And the other question is, if that's what's allowed, we know that they don't always meet their, what they're allowed, and there are violations. And do we know what would happen if they go over 7.5? How is that affecting the communities, people who live literally across the road from there?
I don't think there have been violations of that limit, have there? No, I don't think that is not one that they've ever.
We know there's violations. Okay, so
How about one more question one more for you, how about, and then we'll see if anybody else has one, if that's okay.
Let me ask one more question. So the other question I want to ask is, at least now, is it, you talked about trucks on the roads and that you don't regulate that. We understand you don't regulate that, but that's something we're living with, that pollution on top of whatever pollution is coming out of this facility and all the other 26 facilities that, sources that are in Southwest Detroit here. So we're living with all of that. And do you model either the cumulative impacts of all of that stuff, or do you consider that we are also living with all of that truck pollution from all of those trucks when you're looking at, the health standards for this facility?
Yeah, Kathy, do you want to have Steph talk about that a little bit, Andy?
Well, I can say that for the permit application review, we don't look at that stuff. We don't look at what happens on the public roadways. But I know we do as an agency evaluate that, and I don't know who has the best answer to that question. Because it's not through modeling.
Right.
I don't believe, do we do new road modeling stuff? No. So we have monitors, and Susan can talk more about that later. So yes, that's an important topic. It's not something that's addressed by the permitting regulations.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up, Bill. Kathy, appreciate it.
Yeah, it is important. There's a lot of traffic, and that's important.
Yeah, so
For the modeling, so we're modeling an expected or projected increase in some of these emissions. The impact analysis is that's got to be based off of a baseline of some sort, right? As far as what was we're basing it off of what the impact of the prior emissions were, correct? Or are we using a different baseline to do this modeling?
Well, there's not really a baseline for this modeling. For the toxics modeling, we just looked at everything in the facility emitting at its maximum emission rate. That's, some of those have limits, some aren't limited. So we did what is the maximum that possibly could do. And that we're looking at what's that total impact around the facility. For the criteria pollutants, we just did that significant impact level modeling. And that is just looking at that increase to see how much that increase is. That increase is under that significant impact level. And I should point out, we use the new PM 2.5 significant impact level because EPA just, after we started public comment, EPA reduced that number. And so we went back and checked and that it's still under the new threshold. So we didn't use any baseline kind of stuff. If you don't meet the SIL, that's when we get into
Can you say what
adding
the SIL is again?
significant impact level. So that's when we get into using background and monitoring data and that kind of stuff. But
So as far as, I mean, obviously, as far as that, like, we want to know the impact of the actual increase that Marathon is going to be putting out into the community for these projects, right? Not the impact past what they could have been allowed to increase for their past, based on their past limitations, right? So for a lot of these criteria pollutants, we're actually far above, right? The significant, as far as the increase is, above, 40 tons per year, right? For many of these, or it's above the allowable or the significant emissions rate. For a lot of these, if we were using the actual current levels of production at Marathon, not if we were using it as a baseline, as opposed to the maximum level. So if we were to do, I'm just saying, like, is the modeling on the criteria pollutants, is it just using that little bit that went past significant emissions rate? Or is it actually assessing the literal increase, not zero, but the increase from today's current level and rates of criteria pollutant production? Does that make sense?
yeah, and I don't know
Why don't
if
try to repeat the question back to make sure that we're understanding what the question is.
yeah, so you're kind of talking about the applicability analysis and the calculations and what ended up getting modeled. I think is what you're
Yeah,
getting.
so what did it get modeled from based off of the full increase that's actually going to happen, that we're going to experience as a community? We're going to be experiencing a large impact across a lot of these, even net after the pollution controls are being put in place. So did the actual increase get modeled, or just the increase based on what could have been emitted in the past, but wasn't? Is it based on the emissions limits, what's modeled, or is it based off of the past actual limits on the throughput limits?
I would have to dive back into the calculations and figure out what exact number went into the model.
Yeah, I think it's an important number to look at.
It's the increase in emissions, but like you said, is it the final, after all the accounting is done, increase, or, so I have to look and see.
Yeah, after all the accounting is done increase, or is it the actual increase in the real world? Because I know for all of the numbers that were posted on here, we were not using the actual real world increase. We were using the increase based on a inflated baseline, which is what provided the numbers that made it look like all of the emissions weren't going up by that much, or in some cases it made it look like we're going to go down after pollution controls. All of those are based off of not the actual baseline, the actual current level of criteria pollutant production. It was based off of what could have been produced in the past but wasn't. So they weren't reflecting what the community is actually going to experience going forward.
Yeah, I have to look and see. And
I have looked and seen, so
what?
I have looked through it and seen that, so that is correct. But
Yeah, well, and I would say that the baseline really is not inflated. The calculation method follows EPA's protocol for how you do those calculations.
it is allowable under federal policy to inflate the baseline, so it's not illegally inflated. It is legally inflated, but it is inflated.
Yeah, and we can see, I don't know all the basics.
Let Andy look back through it if that's okay with
Okay,
you. Do you
yeah, sure.
mind?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I don't know if I
Thank
can
you.
find that today. I'm not sure. That's, if you've looked through the application, there's some 300 spreadsheet pages, so It will take a little time to sort that out, figure out which numbers.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you for being willing to do that. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I'll go back to this. Teresa.
Yeah, I was late, so I missed the whole presentation. And so, but I got a
We can
question.
have Andy start over for you. if you'd like.
I don't think anybody, I saw some people nodding off.
I should let you go through it, Andy.
Nobody else might want that.
Okay, but my question is, I'm a little confused because I came in late. The 20 feet that the stacker is currently, you're saying that's in compliance?
No, it complies based on the permit that was issued, and so that's when we do the
The
toxic.
previous permit that was issued. Okay, so with the new request, then to increase it to 35, you consider that adequate for the new proposed increase, correct?
Well, yeah, so there's no increase in gasoline emissions from any of this modeling. The only thing that has changed is the modeling program, because it's been 10 years or so since we last did the modeling. And so the EPA has updated the modeling program, and then there's the weather data. I don't know, did we have 1 minute data back in 2014?
I'll be honest, I don't remember officially
Yeah.
when 1 minute met data, but yep, the EPA does
Oh,
update.
wait.
the
Yeah.
modeling.
Sorry.
No, it's in regard to modeling, EPA does, I wanna say, maybe every year, 2 years, every couple of years, they do update their modeling program. And when they do update that program, we run with the most recent version of it. So that can make a little tweaks smile. Generally, that really doesn't change, overall impacts when you would compare, differences, or they're very, very insignificant. But meteorology changes year to year. So there is a good chance that the meteorology data that was used with the original application, it of course did change, compared to, I believe it was 22 met data was probably used for this project, just this 23 met data was not processed. It takes some time after the new year comes before that data is available. So the meteorology data does change year to year. And since the whole year of meteorology is applied to this facility, it would make small changes to impacts.
Okay, and the second question is this, since EGLE doesn't, regulate truck pollution, and he talked about the pollution going to the street, roadside pollution, and Catherine asked a question about cumulative impact. Wouldn't the modeling be off? When you proposing an increase in pollution or not an increase in pollution because of the surrounding industry and the trucks roadside pollution? So
you're asking, Teresa, let me make sure I'm understanding. So because that model showed it going over the highway, were those emissions from the traffic from the highway then also included in the model?
and you said no. And I want to know why not? Because, and then also, we have Cleveland Cliffs behind Marathon, then we have asphalt companies around there, so the modeling is not really, and they have reckoned in the same, some of the same emissions that are coming from Marathon. So how is that being modeled? I mean, how is that being included in there? If you from a cumulative respect, and then you're doing modeling, we got all these pollutants, same pollutants coming from other areas. How does the modeling project that? There, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Stephanie, can you speak at all to anything else that might be included in the modeling that we did
I would
from
say,
other
like-
facilities and things like that?
Like Andy had said, roadway emissions are not something that we include in modeling. So that was not, actually looked at in this particular case. We, the facility itself, we don't anyway, look at that, as part of the overall modeling project. I will have to say the modeling that we did, like Andy had mentioned, it was that increase that we looked at. EPA it's kind of a 3-step level in regard to modeling for facilities. You first look at project emissions. And what we did, that was the first step I did, is I got the emissions from Andy with the increase and the different criteria pollutants were going to be. I took that increase, I built the facility in a computer program, put in all the emission sources everywhere that, was going to be emitting the different pollutants, applied the meteorology to it, ran the model, came up with the maximum impact over that year for the different averaging times. All the pollutants have different averaging times. And I compared that to what Andy had talked about before earlier, is this significant impact level, which is set by EPA. It's a SIL is what we call it. That's the first step. If the criteria pollutants, the maximum impact of the criteria pollutants are below that significant impact level set by EPA, then those impacts are considered low enough to not affect the national ambient air quality standards. And basically the modeling analysis is sufficient. So that was the modeling that was done for this. That was the case for this particular application.
With that being said, and Marathon has the fence line monitors, why couldn't you use actual data instead of use modeling? Did you use actual data with the modeling?
We use, I guess, actual facility data as far as how the facility is built and actual meteorology data. I'll be honest with you, the monitors that are at Marathon, I can't say much. in
With those
regards to
are,
that.
because those are non-regulatory monitors, they're not part of our regulatory structure, we don't use them in the model.
Well, I've got a question then. If that's the case, when these projects and these PTIs are asked for, why can't you guys come in and use monitors that monitor them over the period of the time that they ask for the permit and for the time that the permit is granted to see what the actual data is?
So like, let me make sure I'm understanding. So for instance, in this case, you're saying, like, if they would put monitors in now,
Yeah, no,
And
from the
then-
time that they file for the request,
okay, so in the beginning, and then
then to the time
we're here talking about
talking
it.
about
Yep,
it, to see what the actual numbers are, right?
yeah, I mean, I think that's a good comment to say, Teresa. We don't have a mechanism really for doing that, but it's a good comment. So
I mean, wouldn't you want to know where they are?
And I think,
would.
and you're talking about both criteria pollutants and toxics, because Stephanie was talking primarily criteria modeling with SIL. But you're also asking about gasoline emissions, so you're asking for both.
Yeah, because you have a permit from MPLX, you have one from Marathon itself, right? So I'm looking at source. I'm looking at tracing sources of the emissions. We're talking about gasoline, but then Marathon may be doing diesel and other stuff that create criteria pollutants. Wouldn't it be, in my mind, that you set up some actual monitors to get actual data so that you can kind of see that their projection and the modeling is a little bit on point? In my opinion, I'm just saying. But anyway, my last question is Marathon under a current consent agreement? Because when I was briefing over, I saw something about the consent agreement and I was sleepy. I was tired because, reading something like this should be boring.
So was it boring or was it just too much? Okay, that's fair,
I mean,
that's fair.
I often wake up, I'm still at the computer. So, so yeah, so I'm a little confused. So explain that about the consent agreement for me. 'Cause-
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's sure. So Steve, I don't know, because it's an EPA consent
Exactly, being
agreement.
a federal decree, I'm not sure what the effective date still is, if it's still in effect right
But
now.
we can
But
find
we
that
can
out.
find that out for you for sure.
No, you're right. There,
And the permit
Yep.
somewhere.
yep,
There's
definitely.
reference to it,
I
exactly.
don't think y'all didn't read it, come on.
No, Andy, so Andy had mentioned that earlier, that one of the things Marathon wanted to do, because they kind of have to, is ask for conditions from the EPA consent agreement to be
Okay.
put into this permit.
Okay.
So it's not anything new, it's something that's still ongoing, it just needs to be put into the permit. And Andy can talk a little bit more, I don't know if you can know specifically what those were off the top of your head, and if not, we can get back to Teresa too on that.
Yeah, there's just two things that were added, and I think I can tell you what, I can't right now, but I can find out what they are. So what happens is we did permits a few years ago to add requirements from EPA consent agreements into their permits, and these two things got missed. And so Marathon realized that, and so we're putting them in there because they should be in there, but they were missed before. So we're just fixing that mistake.
Well, maybe y'all should let us review it next time.
Yeah, Teresa is volunteering to do that.
Well, better you than me, let me tell you.
Okay, hold on one second.
So quick question is, your numbers that you're getting, are those from the current stack tests that they're doing at the refinery? Are you putting those into your model to get your numbers that you're getting on how much these emissions are? And the other part of that question is, are they at full charge? And how do you what type of proof do you have that they are running at their max capacity, or what they're telling you that they're running at when they're producing these, emissions that they're supposed to be testing to be able to give you guys the numbers?
Yeah, so if you want to talk a little bit about that first, Andy, but then I think Steve can talk a little bit about it too. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Yeah, We didn't use any of their test data for the modeling. Some of that data may have gone into the background emission calculations that went into the emission rates that we modeled. But we didn't use any monitoring data in our modeling. We used for the toxics, the maximum hourly rates that either are allowed or that they can physically do. They have, a bunch of heaters out there. And, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, 17 and under.
In here, they're like, we're not 17 and under, we're good, we got it.
Not call that stuff. Not wait for it. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, our toxics modeling was based on the maximum. They have all these heaters out there that, the heater might be capable of 100 million BTU per hour. Generally, they don't operate at their maximum. They usually operate lower, but we modeled all of them at the maximum. And we modeled them all at the same time at their maximum. And actually for the heater modeling, what we did is modeled every separate heater and added those results together. Which is a very worst case estimate, because the heater that's over here and then one that's over here, their maximum concentration outside is not gonna be in the same place. But when we did that modeling, we assumed that they all happen at the same place. So for that, we didn't use, back to the question, we didn't use the monitoring data in any of the modeling. And Steve can talk about when they do the test.
It is a good question. It's one we get asked a lot, like, how do you know that someone's actually doing a representative test? What they're doing on the day of testing actually represents what they would normally do when we're not there testing, right? Well, along with having to have the proper reference test that I talked about, companies are also required to monitor their operations when they're testing. They have to look at like production data. It could be, pressure drop across the system. So they actually have to have data from prior to the test to show what is typical production data for that process. And they have to maintain that during the test. We've had tests we've actually stopped because production has dipped or gone up too high. We've actually had companies call it off because they couldn't maintain production. So we based on recent past data to get representative operations. It could be the control equipment, it could be of the process itself, let's say a boiler, and they have to maintain that during the test. If they don't, then the test is not valid.
Did you have those numbers?
Wait, hold on.
We do, yeah, they actually, yeah.
We might not hear you online.
I was just wondering if they had.
You want to know if we had the numbers, and we do. During the test, we usually have company personnel or test personnel monitoring those operating parameters. They share with us when we're there, and we actually get that as part of the test as well. So when we get that final test report, which is online, which will not just the actual test protocol and the actual test results, it actually show the production data as well that they monitor during the testing. Every test is required to do that. It's a really good question. We get that one a lot.
Yeah, it's because we're trying to look at the worst case we can. So that's, part of combining a lot of this stuff together. Catherine, do you have more questions or anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, I'll come back to Catherine. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see you. Hold on 1 second.
I see a lot of modeling for people outside the community, but what about inside the facility? Have they did any modeling for inside the facility instead of outside the facility?
So like from a worker safety standpoint, do we look at any of that? Can you use the mic and answer the question? Wow.
Yeah, no, we don't do that. Our program evaluates the ambient air that the general public has access to. There are like OSHA, federal standard, and MyOSHA, other agencies that regulate what is inside the plant that workers are exposed to.
Which
So-
doesn't mean it's not done, it's just that
We
they
don't.
don't do it. And so there's a different department that handles that. And a lot of times, and Steve might be able to speak to this. I used to be an inspector like Steve was a long time ago. And sometimes when we go into facilities, if we see things that we think might be of a hazard to workers, we do report those to MyOSHA quite often. So there is kind of some checks and balances, but the department that they work for, like Andy said, we're looking at things that are mostly outdoor air, that you're gonna be outside in your yard, breathing, walking down the road, that kind of stuff. Inside the facility boundaries is a different agency. So do you have a follow-up for that? Okay, Regina, do you want to follow up on it?
I was just gonna ask you to define and say what MyOSHA stands for and what OSHA stands.
Yeah, no problem. So MyOSHA is the Michigan Occupational Safety, Health and Safety Administration, and then OSHA is the federal branch of that. So any other questions? Otherwise, I'll go back. Catherine, did you? Oh, hold on. I want to get to people who haven't asked one, if that's okay.
other agencies are looking at how it affects inside the facility, does that affect the permit at all?
Oh, it's a good question.
It usually won't unless they discover something that would get relayed back to our staff that, yeah, they're not doing this the way that they should be doing it. And so we know there's extra emissions coming out. And so that would get relayed if they find something.
Yeah, I mean, a good example would be, so if one of those agencies for worker safety identified something and, or we saw something, either way, they might identify something and it might be that the process isn't running how it's supposed to. And so that could lead to Steve going and doing an inspection, which could lead to a violation notice and something else happening. Potentially, they have to change their permit, they have to change how they're operating things. So there's definitely some checks and balances there, but it's not necessarily a relationship that's an everyday kind of thing. So that's a really good question. Yeah, for sure. Did you have a follow-up? I just want to make sure. Okay. I'm sorry, my shoes are making a weird noise, so I apologize.
You spoke of expanding the air monitoring. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So Andy, the perimeter air monitoring, I think? Sure.
Yeah, so Marathon has their 3 ambient monitors that are on the fence line, then they have another one that I'm not sure where it is, but at the school. And so those were put in place back in, I don't know, 2008, 2009 with that previous big project through an agreement. And they were required by, they agreed to, and so we put in the permit to do that for 10 years. That 10 years ended, I think, last year. And so Marathon has committed that they will continue doing that for 3 more years, which is great. And we like to see that data. It's very helpful for the community. The challenge is that we have no legal authority to make them do that if they don't want to. So, I mean, that's our challenge. We don't have a legal basis, but they have said, hey, we're gonna do this 3 more years. And like Steve and I, mentioned, so that's gonna be in the permit. And so if next year they decide to turn them off, that's a violation of the permit, because the permit will require them to continue for 3 years.
Yeah, so if the permit goes through, they're legally liable to keeping those for 3 more years at least operating and running. And so just as a little bit of a follow-up to Andy's, the information from those monitors, if folks didn't know already, and maybe all of you in the room do, all of their information is available online too. They have an online website where you can go and look at all that data kind of in real time. So we link to that information just to try to get some of that, but they do put that online too, and that's also required in the permit. So did you have a follow-up on that? Okay, no, thank you. Oh, good question. Anyone else got a question that hasn't asked one yet? And then I'll get back to Catherine. I'll come to you first if you still have another one. Okay.
So the question is about the toxic air contaminants. So you said you look at those and you determine whether they're under the limit. Do you look at each of them individually? Or do you look at any combinations or interactions that might be with different chemicals that are coming out?
Yeah, that's a good question. You wanna, why don't you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about it, Andy, but then let Mike talk a little bit about.
Yeah, just gotta
yeah.
correct anything I say. So it's a combination of both. So there are some toxic air contaminants excuse me, that we look at on their own because they have their own health-based screening level. And then you have things like gasoline, that's a mixture of chemicals, and our toxicologists have developed a screening level that applies to that mixture. So we look at all of that together. The same thing with diesel. There are quite a few different product kind of streams at the refinery that we look at as a group like that. So it's a combination of some things on their own and then some things grouped together like that.
Hi, so the toxic air contaminants, we have initial threshold screening levels for each one of those. Some of those toxic air contaminants, are specific distillery streams like heavy naphtha or Stoddard solvent. And there are several types of those distillate streams that have the same toxic effect. So we put a footnote on that. Not only do they have, is that individual distillate stream have to meet that screening level, but the other ones that also have that footnote. So we have, in this permit, there's several distillate streams that have footnotes where the combined impact must be below the screen.
So when Mike's talking about the footnote, that's an air quality thing about a spreadsheet that has all the toxic air contaminants in it. There's 1,270 something now. And we can give a link to that. You maybe have seen it before, but we actually just recently updated our webpage on our toxics unit and what they do. And so what he's talking about is in the listing. So if you look at all the toxic air contaminants that they looked at for this permit, you find them in the spreadsheet, they'll all have this little footnote. And so if you go down to the very bottom of all of those, you'll see that spreadsheet can be daunting. So I would recommend, if it was me, giving Mike a call and saying, please walk me through this, Mike. I'm trying to find what you did. So just letting you know, when he's saying footnote, that's kind of what he's talking about. Do you have other stuff you wanted to add to that too, Mike, or are you good?
Well, I wanted to say something about the gasoline
Sure.
screening level. So that gasoline screening level is sort of old now. It was based on a study that used gasoline that was formulated in the old days when it had more benzene. So our screening levels actually, the newer gasoline doesn't have as much benzene as thought, and is thought to be less carcinogenic. So when this new process that Marathon is using, they're making gasoline with less benzene. So even though our screening level it's sort of extra strict, it's more conservative than if the screening level was updated. So those maps that Andy showed where the concentration of gasoline around the facility looked like it was too high. If we had updated the gasoline screening level, it would probably go down, and so that non-compliant area, which.
Okay, thanks for that.
Well, MPLX says, would you do that now so we don't have to raise our stack?
Yeah, no, they need to raise that stack. All right, did you have another one, Catherine, since I'm here? Okay, thank you, did.
I'm okay, we're going to comments, all right.
Time check, Judy?
17 minutes.
17 minutes? It's up to you, no pressure.
I'll wait.
Okay, no problem. Teresa?
I got a question. Why, since this is 3 separate companies, would they be all up under one? Even though in the permit, it said that they are connected. So you guys, I think, compounded the issue by pumping them together. MPLX, air products, and then the other one. And it's difficult for residents to digest because when you go online, it's confusing with this technical scientific data already. So what was able to be put into place to allow 3 permits at one time? Because we gotta digest all of this.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So I know you weren't here in the beginning. Andy talked a little bit about why that happened, but I think it's still worth going over again, if you don't mind.
Yeah, each one of those companies is its own legal entity.
Yeah.
And so each one is legally responsible for their emissions,
Okay.
which is why they each have their own permit. But the reason that MPLX is changing that stack height is that we modeled the gasoline emissions from the entire refinery, from every single emission source on the site. And so that's why they're together at the same time, because they're related to each other. And the same reason that Air Products, if Marathon increases their long-term production, Air Products might have to make more hydrogen over the long term. And so they could have an emission increase. And so they're part of that whole project. And so all of their emissions were lumped in together. And so that's why they're all three here at the same time. Because even though they're legally 3 separate entities, the emissions and the processes are all tied together. And so we're evaluating all of that all together.
See, That's strange to me, because you're evaluating it all together, but yet and still you won't consider cumulative impact. So I'm just asking a question in my layman brain. You know, how can I equate this? Because it seems to me that it's appropriate when you guys do it and the companies do it, but it's not appropriate when community actually look at cumulative impact.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point, because really, it's very limited, but this is a form of looking at things cumulatively. And the law allows us to do it this way,
Well,
and that's part of it.
we're kind of required to because
Yeah.
they're considered a single stationary source. And so if,
The three separate companies?
yes, they are considered a single stationary source because their operations are integrated together. You don't have MPLX loading gasoline into trucks if Marathon's not making gasoline. You don't have Air Products producing hydrogen if Marathon's not using hydrogen to desulfurize their products. So they're all intimately related. If you go to like, the salt mine next door, the salt mine and Marathon, there's no relationship whatsoever between their operations, which is why we don't look at them together.
Well, when we look at cumulative impact, we're looking at it all together because it's having a serious impact. But you guys will not separate that. So it kind of seems like you're comparing apples and oranges when it's convenient. But not convenient when we request to be looked at individually. To look at cumulatively, because the cumulative impact, 1 bad, 2 bad, 3 bad, all that's together is being bad on us. So,
Yeah, no, I understand the point, and it's something that I know we're working on. We can have a group to look at that, but it's legally how the regulations work. It's how it's legally set up, and that's
Which
how
does
we have
make
to
it
operate.
less frustrating for you, but so I appreciate you bringing that up, Teresa, because the way you describe it is really poignant, and it is important for us to keep hearing it, and I hope you make a comment about that too. Yep, I got you.
Just a simple question. As we know, emissions can be challenging from a technological standpoint to monitor and to measure depending on the pollutant. Would you say it's easier from a technological standpoint to monitor the emissions coming out of Marathon, like monitoring like the surrounding air, or easier to monitor the throughput inputs going into them?
It's a good question.
Yeah, so if you're putting, like Marathon's monitors around the outside, those pick up not just Marathon's emissions, but all of the emissions from everywhere else. And so that's very important information because that's real health data. But at the same time, it doesn't really have anything to do with Marathon complying with their specific limits. Now, if we see high spikes in that monitoring data, yes, that may indicate there's something going on and we need to look at it. But the two, Marathon has emission limits on their specific processes, and that's what they have to meet.
My question is more so like, because this permit is about transferring from using throughputs limits as a way to regulate Marathon, which is limiting, which is a hard limit on what they're able to emit indirectly, but it's a hard limit. And this is an easily verifiable process, what they're able to put into there, right? It's easy to document, it's easy to verify, it's easy to enforce. How do you compare that level of ability to enforce that to enforcing through retroactively through what's coming out of those stacks? Is it easier to measure the inputs, or is it easier to measure the outputs if we're looking to like keep our communities safe from keep them accountable to keep producing consistently the same amount and not ever go above that amount? Is it easier to use throughput inputs to do that and more accurate, or to retroactively use emissions data from like a variety of testing sources?
So I think let Steve talk about that, if you don't mind, because I think that there's things in the permit that still involve throughputs and tracking all of that stuff, and that is important. And
Yeah, I want to touch on it a little bit too. All the throughput records are still required, so they still have to track all that, so we'll know what they're doing. The challenge is the way the refinery operates, throughput does not directly correlate to emissions. There's it's a very complicated facility. So you can have X amount of crude oil coming in. If they turn that into gasoline, you have one emission profile. If they turn it into diesel, you have a different emission profile. So it's not just the throughput, it's what's happening with it. It's also their, different processes. They have the catalytic cracking unit that has catalyst in it. Well, as that catalyst gets older, the emission profile changes. It's also weather dependent. I mean, the storage tanks, if it's warm, they have more emissions. So you might have lower throughput.
Can't regulate weather.
Right, but that's part of the thing is that if it's hot and the throughput's low, they may actually have more emissions than when it's cold and throughput is high. So,
We can't regulate that.
right, we can't, but at the same time, the throughput's not a direct correlation to the emissions either. So it's very complicated.
So we need both, is what you're
Yes, we
saying?
need both.
Yes.
Yes, so they have a lot of emission limits. The throughput limits are going away because when they were put in place, nobody knew how much they could really do. Now Marathon's been operating for like 10 years. Now they know what they can do, what their potential throughput is. And so we're going with what's the maximum they could physically do. That's what we've evaluated for the permit.
So Andy, just to reiterate, you said those conditions, the requirement to keep all of those records would not go away if these permits were approved.
Yeah, that's correct. They still have to track all those same throughputs. They just don't have.
They can just put in as much as they want.
Not as much as they want, as much as they can. I mean, because the barrels per day limit, crude oil is 140,000 barrels per day. They can't put 200,000 through because the refinery can't do that.
And then if they end up putting in, if putting in a lot more ends up, creating excess emissions, we just have to kind of like hope that it's detected in some way, shape or form. And by self-monitoring or self-reporting, that kind of thing on your end.
Well, when they do the testing, they're running those units at that high level. So, they don't do a test at a really low throughput level because, as Steve said, that wouldn't be representative and we would reject it. They've got to run at that higher level so we know what the emissions are when they're putting more through.
Now that they can run it, you mentioned some of these pollutants accumulating over a long period of time. Now that they can run it effectively year round, were we able to test based on a full year of accumulated emissions running at maximum capacity?
So is there, maybe Steve will know this, so, and let me know if I'm not interpreting your question correctly, but I think there's some talk, at least you mentioned earlier, that they have some continuous emissions monitoring and things like that. I don't know if it impacts this part of the process that we're talking about, but there's other kind of checks and balances in here that we maybe could talk about from your perspective, what you look at as an inspector.
Yeah, I would just say that the toxics modeling we did was based on the absolute maximum that the equipment can do.
In one given time, but like you said,
Well,
you mentioned
per hour.
Per hour, right?
Right.
You mentioned the accumulation over time. So
Yeah.
now that they can produce over a full year and they don't have to slow that down and for any given period of time, we're able to test what the maximum would be if they were run for a full year, not just testing at maximum capacity for any given period of time, but accumulating year by year, if what the maximum impact would be. In that
Yeah,
case,
yeah, I said
with
the maximum pound per hour, and we assume that happens all year long.
Definitely.
8,760 hours per year, that's what we assumed when we did that modeling. So,
And with the stack testing, I assume as the year goes on, we have increased production, we would actually change what the production they would actually maintain during a stack test would be based on the increase in production. It would be based on historical data, like you said, possibly over a year, see what the new production rate would be, and that would be the basis they need to maintain during a stack test.
Yeah, good questions. You guys are asking a lot of good questions. Can we give me a time check? 5 more minutes? Any last questions? Should we vote if Kate is allowed to ask a question? Yes, Kate.
This is the democracy.
Yes, Kate, you are allowed to ask questions, no problem.
What is the impact of taking out the crude flare? That's part of the permit, right?
Yeah, good question. Andy?
yeah, the crude flare, currently, if it's running, will have emissions. And what they're gonna do is they have a flare gas recovery system that was installed that would take, because back, years ago, and you guys who live around here would know, there was a lot of flames coming out of the flares, and they have done a lot of work to reduce that. And so they have the flare gas recovery. It takes that gas that they would have burned and it recovers it and puts it back in the process. And that's what they're gonna do with the crude flares, anything that would go to that, goes back in the process. But we want them to have flaring capability, because if there's something that goes wrong, you just don't want that stuff wafting over the neighborhood. You want them to burn it off, so it's safe. So they're really, back in the past, they were kind of a routine operating thing. Today, they are much more of an emergency. If something went wrong and we gotta make this place safe, and so the flare, like happened earlier in the winter, it'll go off, and, it was a little bit loud in the middle of the night, it was, a little disturbing, but they need to have that capability to keep everybody at the plant and the neighborhood safe, because you don't want that stuff wafting around, because if it does and it ignites, that's not good.
Good with that? Okay, good question. All right. I think you guys are done questioning for now. We're gonna go to public comment. So we're gonna take like a 5-minute break. Just if anybody needs to use the restroom, stretch, we're just gonna switch things over here. So thanks very much to the panelists, much appreciated for the answers. Thank you, audience, for the questions. You're gonna put the Zoom on pause? get started with this next part of the night. People want to take their seats, that would be awesome.
That's right.
Jim, if you want to get things started on the again, we're good?
Yeah, all right, thanks. Yeah, good talk.
All right, so we're gonna start the official hearing here in just a second. But I said I was gonna go over this slide before the hearing, just so that it'd be kind of fresh in everybody's minds as you kind of think about what you might want to comment on. So one of the things that we get asked often is, what can I comment on? What's open for comment? So really, when you're thinking about making a comment, anything is open for comment. Anything in all three of the permits is open for comment. So it's completely okay to say, I don't want this, I do want this, but if we want to make changes in the permits that are going to be productive, there's just kind of like some hints on what you might want to focus on. Comments that are more likely to lead to changes are going to be focused on the content of the permit. So I know we have folks in this audience that will read through every condition, and that is wonderful. And we've definitely made changes based on comments that people have put in. Comments that are requesting specific changes, so more testing, different record keeping, things like that. That's going to be comments that are going to be more impactful and potentially change what ends up being in a final permit if it's issued. Again, comments that would be least likely to lead to changes, but that are still completely acceptable to give would be things that you either support or don't support the idea of these permits going through. Things that we talked about a little bit, it's been brought up quite a bit, truck traffic, zoning, noise, things like that. In your area with these permits specifically, the city would be the ones who would be responsible for any ordinances or things like that related to those three things. And then again, just whether there's support or opposition. So just to be clear, you can comment on anything, but a lot of times people want to know, how can I make a difference in these permits if they're issued? How can I influence what the end result might be? So just want to briefly go over that. Any questions about comments before we get into the actual hearing? Because remember, during the hearing portion, we won't be responding to any questions. Okay, all right, well, Annette and I are going to start the formal hearing. So I'm going to be the hearing officer. So I have to read kind of a dry statement to you all. I apologize in advance for it. Teresa, I hope that it's not too much like Andy's write-ups. Just saying, so, all right. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon. I am with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. Annette Switzer, Air Quality Division Director, is the decision maker for these permit applications. She'll be listening to your comments this evening. She will be considering all comments before she makes a decision. So this hearing is related to requests for Marathon's Detroit permitting project, including proposed permits from Marathon Petroleum Company LP, or Marathon, Air Products and Chemicals Incorporated, or Air Products, and MPLX Terminals LLC, or MPLX, which are existing sources located in Detroit, Michigan. The project includes various throughput, emission, and process changes. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The laws governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before a company can install and operate any new equipment, they must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. This means the equipment must be capable of meeting state and federal emission standards, including health-based standards. The proposed permits must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of operating the equipment to ensure these standards are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to allow anyone interested in the proposed permits to provide information we can use in deciding whether to approve the permits or if there's additional issues to consider. Please note these are still draft permits. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permits available will help you in providing comments. Everything in the draft permits remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether they will be granted at all. The department can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria we use in making a decision. For example, local zoning, truck traffic, and noise concerns are not within our authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition to the proposed project. We'll be happy to make note of your position, but please understand the department is by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed project. This hearing is being recorded and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision on the proposed project. The public comment period for the proposed permits began on April 17th and will end at midnight on June 3rd, 2024. Additional comments or information may be submitted through that time via written or verbal comment during this hearing, by email, or by voicemail. After the public comment period closes, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision on the permit applications will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the permits, approve them as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permits, if any, have been changed in the final permits and the reasons for the change. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permits. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and listen to those comments. You may submit a written comment at any time during the comment period by US Post or email, or you may call in a comment to the public comment voicemail. I'll begin calling the names of the people who have indicated they would like to make a verbal comment tonight. Once we go through the cards, anyone else who would like to make a comment will be able to do so, even if you have not already indicated you would like to make a comment on your comment card. For anyone online who would like to submit a verbal comment, please raise your hand and we will unmute your line so you can speak. If we have someone calling in, you will just need to dial #2 on your phone to raise your hand. You may also type the word comment into your question box and submit your comment in writing tonight. We'll limit your comment time to about 3 minutes. So if you're speaking, I'll let you know when you have about 30 seconds left. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will now begin calling the names of those who have indicated they would like to make a statement. And then Jeff has the microphone, so he will come to you when your name is called. So if you could just raise your hand, to let him know who you are. And I apologize in advance. My handwriting reading skills have greatly diminished, so I'll do my best. Okay, so the first person I have is Marcia Bay. Marcia? Did I say your last name right, Marcia? Okay, thank you so much. So when you're making a comment, if you wouldn't mind saying your name for the record and then any affiliation that you might have, that will be really helpful for us. So Marcia, go ahead whenever you're ready.
My name is Marcia Bay. I originally thought I would have a question, but after sitting and listening, I don't really have a question in regard to what information was disseminated. But I would love for us to, as a community, to ask Marathon for consideration in community projecting. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to do.
Yep, thank you so much for your comment. You okay, Jeff?
No,
Okay. All right, the next person that I have here is Allie Simmons. Someone with the last name Simmons. I apologize if I didn't get your first name right.
Good.
Are you good? Okay, I'm sorry. What's your first name? Do you mind? Yuli. Oh, I should have. Okay, apologies.
It's all good.
Nope, that's fine. Jeff Trikoff. Jeff?
Jeff Trikoff, I am a representative of Teamsters Local 283 and the members that operate the Marathon Refinery. After the Q&A and understanding how your modeling works, you said worst case scenario as in operating everything at 100%, but for us as workers, we know that operating everything at 100% has to be done effectively and efficiently.
Warren, Bear, Please come to the front desk with all your belongings. Please come to the front desk with all your belongings.
If Jeff, if you want to start over, you can, or if you want to just pick it up from there, either way, apologies for that.
So to operate at 100%, the equipment needs to be run effectively and efficiently and done by experienced people, and that's what we have. And your historic data is done because we've been the ones operating the refinery for years now. Right now, we are in a labor dispute with our current contract having expired on February 1st. And Marathon is preparing to bring in temporary workers to take our position. And one of our 15-year seniority people asked me to read the comment on his behalf. Says, I'm very concerned with Marathon looking to maximize their output under the current labor conditions happening at the Detroit Refinery. The members of Local 283 pride ourselves on protecting the community while we produce safe and reliable transportation fuels. The current atmosphere of Marathon continues to be unrelenting and is forcing its workers closer and closer to the picket line. The men and women of Local 283 have prided ourselves on safe operation for our fellow man and the surrounding community. Our members have family living near the refinery, so we take even greater care in going above and beyond when it comes to environmental protection and safe operations. With the current climate edging closer to the forcing of members of Local 283 on strike, my greatest concern relative to permit limit increases is the people that will be operating the refinery. Detroit Refinery, statistically compared to Marathon's other refineries, has led the industry in environmental issues, safety, lowest injury and fatality rates, low community impact, and reliability of equipment. These statistics have nothing to do with corporate entities, CEOs, or upper management. These industry-leading numbers come from the hourly men and women, many of whom are Detroiters, being the best in the industry at what they do. Our potential replacements come from southern refineries known for poor training, high incidence of injury, death, community chemical releases, etc. I think it is in the best interest for the community and those involved to reject Marathon's request for permit deviations and or limit increases until the labor dispute between Marathon and Teamsters Local 283 are resolved. We do not want outside workers running a unit in the middle of the city they have absolutely no ties to, who are undertrained and unfamiliar with the equipment. These folks that come up to scab out union jobs have no personal connection to the city, the community, and the families in the community. These factors are the core of what keeps the members of Local 283 striving for perfection and being industry leading at what we do. We work as if our children are standing right outside the gate watching us. For many, our communities and homes are right outside those gates. Increasing permits with a grossly substandard, undertrained replacement workforce will be detrimental to the city of Detroit. It is my opinion that any permit limit increase be scrutinized until the labor dispute has been resolved between Marathon and the Teamsters of Local 283. I've experienced every single emergency or hazardous situation in my 15 years at Marathon and continue to learn and grow as a field equipment operator daily. Increasing permit limits with an inferior and inexperienced workforce, most of whom will not have City of Detroit boiler licenses, will potentially put the city, community, and people of this community at risk. The city is not protected unless the brothers and sisters of Local 283 are the ones protecting it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Jeff. All right, Dr. Leonard, you are the next one that I have to make a comment.
Yes. Because I came early, my name, Dolores Leonard, 4217 zip code, 48217 Air Monitoring Committee. I'm going to begin with my summary. In fact, I have a summary and I have a section entitled Connecting the Dots. Attached to my 5-page comments is a list entitled Potential Health Impacts of Chemicals Monitored in 4217. In 2015, 2016, 2017, the 4217 community members worked on a project that resulted in an air monitor being installed behind the New Mount Hermon Missionary Baptist Church. Out of that outgrowth, the next question was, what about the chemicals that are being emitted? what are the impacts of those chemicals on people. And so we recognize that when people go to the doctor, they have symptoms, and doctors work on symptoms. They really don't know. However, if people when they go to their doctors, if they tell the doctors where they live, under the conditions, the environmental conditions on which they live, the pollutants, that would have helped the doctors in being able to accommodate a possible patient. And so this document lists 37, let me verify, 37 chemicals with the potential health impacts based on each of those chemicals, with the reference if someone wanted to actually look at them. No, excuse me, there are, let me verify, and I have submitted my written comments. There are 34 comments on chemicals. That is one of my attachments. The second attachment I want to call to your attention is an article in 2007 Detroit News. Detroit to offer Marathon a tax deal. This article discusses that when Marathon approached the city of Detroit City Council, it did not discuss hydrogen. There were a number of things that it did do. It said that they were in discussions with 2 other cities. This article refutes that. It says that one of the companies mentioned had not spoken with Marathon in 1 year. Another said that they had not spoken with Marathon at all. This article breaks down the money that the city of Detroit, $180 million, I believe, that they were expecting to come to the city of Detroit coffers at the expense and the health of the citizens. The vote was 7-2. 7 people who voted for, 2 people against. I'm gonna pass on that because I'm time limited. So another article, another resource I want you to consider. A book entitled The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, Rothstein. Because one of my questions is, how did the citizens of Detroit end up being where they are? And I call this connecting the dots through personal observation, collateral damage, sacrificial lambs, and unintended consequences. Upon reading The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein, Liver Light Publishing Corporation, it is clear how the various levels of government have placed the value of their economy over the existence of people, failing to recognize there is no economy without people. How is it that polluting industries are in or near communities of low income, overburdened populations? Polluting industries who have exceeded their approved and permitted emission levels are permitted to purchase emission levels from other polluting industries that do not use their approved and permitted emission levels. Cumulative impact is long overdue at all levels of government. Reading the role governments have played from the federal government to our local governments, there is no question as to how and why decisions were made. Robert K. Merton authored an article discussing unintended consequences. We in 48217 are unintended consequences, but I think we were intended consequences because there was a money exchange. Many decisions made or not made by elected officials have had negative consequences on not only the 48217 zip code community, but entire communities. And I think of the Saladas community. In October 2007, the city of Detroit City Council, I'm repeating this, voted 7-2 to approve the Marathon 1.5 billion hoop expansion, believing they were besting two other cities for the site of the hoop, only to discover in a newspaper article that I just mentioned to you that Marathon had never approached one city and the other city had not been approached with a proposal over a year. And that's the Detroit News, October 10, 2007, pages 5B, 6B, and I have attached that copy. The council vote was 186 million incentives over 20 years. The majority vote disregarded the concerns of the citizens who opposed the permit because of increased pollution. At the state of Michigan level, I witnessed a company that had 44 violations receive a permit to operate after the state of Michigan governor and the Michigan Economic Development visited the site. The company is located next to an elementary school. During a 2007 purpose-driven visit to Washington, D.C., I visited several congressional offices. During one stop, I was told that a Marathon lobbyist had visited the previous day. The story the lobbyist told to the aide was different than the story I told of my community. Is my time almost up?
It's up, but it's all right.
Wrapping up.
Thank you.
I'm only really,
You're all good.
I'm only doing a portion.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
I'm very long-winded.
No, it's all right.
It is common for lobbyists to write the bills that elected congressional officials pass on to EPA. In many instances, EPA is unable to protect the communities because politics, economy, and profits for companies control and rule what is permitted into our environment. And so with that, I will stop. I do have a formal letter approaching, and that I have submitted, and I do have what I call my summary. All that is in writing you have received. Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much. Okay, the next person is Matt Sears. Matt?
That was a question, I got it.
Okay, perfect. Yep, thank you. You can always pass, come back later. Catherine Savoy?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, Catherine Savoy, resident of 4216 zip code here in Detroit. I will submit written comments, but I wanted to just, for the record, raise some of the concerns that I have about this permit. Unfortunately, most of my comments are things that I'm free to say according to you, but will not lead to likely lead to changes in this permit. So I'm concerned about the fact that this company has a permit to increase its operations and its throughput. I think that's very concerning. You know, as a community member living near this facility, I'm concerned about the potential increase in long-term emissions. I'm concerned that in looking at the impact of the facility, you are not considering the cumulative impacts. You're not considering the context in which this facility is operating in a city. All the other facilities, the 26, you know, on the map on your website, the 26 other facilities that are in this area that we are also living with. There's a combined impact of all of these. It really impacts our health and quality of life. I'm concerned about potential increase in trucks in the area. I know you're not looking at trucks. I think you should be looking at trucks. It's not your responsibility to regulate them, but it is your responsibility to consider the impacts of this combined with the changes that are happening in the facility. I am really just horrified at the gentleman from the Teamsters Local 283 representing Marathon workers talking about the labor dispute and the potential for absolutely unskilled and inexperienced workers to be running this facility with an increased capacity. You can run it, I'm working at it all, but if they increase capacity, it's just kind of a horrifying thought. So I just want to say that for the record. And then finally, I just want to talk about this public comment, the way that this is presented. I want to refer to a recent study in Environmental Health News about public comment participation and how that can be if not done properly, really disempowering. And I can say somebody's come to a million of these things over the years. It's very disempowering to come and see this. You know, you can say these things, you can say whatever you want, it's not going to influence our decision. This is published in Environmental Health News, a study that showed that people who were most engaged in public participation processes had significantly greater mental health impacts than people who didn't engage, because it's disempowering, because it's not done in a meaningful way where people can actually influence the decision. And that's what I'm reading here on this slide. So from this study abstract, we argue that when people engage in public participation processes that have little or no effect on agency decision-making, which is what I'm hearing, it is not only disempowers, but can harm those individuals and erode their trust in government institutions. Furthermore, we contend that providing the public with participation opportunities that are merely performative, with little ability to influence decision-making outcomes, is a violation of both procedural and recognition of justice, two of the core tenets of environmental justice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments. Okay, the next person that I'm going to call is Brian Sorelski.
Smigelski.
Smigelski. I was pretty close on that. Not close enough, but pretty close.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Brian Smigelski. I work at the Michigan Sierra Club. We're working on submitting some official comments and writing, but I'm just here to offer some of my own preliminary thoughts from my perspective as a field organizer here in Detroit. Sierra Club will recommend that EGLE reject this permit due to its impacts on air quality and the risk of a significant pollution burden in an area suffering from the cumulative impacts of multiple pollution sources. EGLE's own Michigan Healthy Climate Plan emphasizes a commitment to environmental justice and combating the climate crisis. This proposed package of permits contradicts those goals. We must make no mistake. There is some smoke and mirror situation going on here. Marathon is seeking a significant increase in its net emissions, even after accounting for its pollution control projects. So I hope that we can be clear about this. By using an inflated baseline, it's legal to do this. From my understanding, EGLE doesn't have to let them do this, but it's legal, federally legal for them to use an inflated baseline. The company is avoiding the thorough review that would be mandated by the Clean Air Act's Prevention of Significant Deterioration Program, or PSD for short. The proposed project summary of these permits uses unclear language that obscures the fact that removing throughput limits will result in increased emissions of at least 10 pollutants, including substantial rises in 3 specific pollutants: nitrogen oxides by 75.5 tons per year, particulate matter less than 2.5 micrometers, PM 2.5, by 27.4 tons per year, and sulfuric acid mist by 7.9 tons per year. Marathon's pollution control projects that are being proposed alongside this will only mitigate a small fraction of these substantial increases. Nitrogen oxide, it'll mitigate less than half, but for the other ones, it's a tiny fraction. From the research I've done, it is very, very, very minimal. So approving this permit means significant real-world emission increases. Why are we being unclear about that? And it's happening without thorough impact analysis. In majority BIPOC communities already suffering from the cumulative impacts of these very pollutants. Does this align with the actions of an institution genuinely committed to environmental justice? While the Clean Air Act allows Marathon to avoid PSD requirements, like thorough reviews, impact analysis, but by using an inflated baseline, please, if you don't, hopefully EGLE understands what I'm talking about here, but if you don't, please do that research. EGLE must uphold its commitment to environmental justice. I call on EGLE to reject this application on this basis and require the current throughput limits be used as the baseline for determining significant emission rates. This will ensure real-world emissions increases trigger PSD impact analyses. Okay, so the removal of throughput limits in favor of emissions limits also decreases the exposure of communities already burdened by a history of ineffective regulatory oversight to the risks of a less effective form of regulation. Throughput limits remain essential for protecting public health. They provide a straightforward, verifiable way to control emissions by capping the amount of material processed in the first place. This direct approach ensures compliance with little room for ambiguity. It is throughput limits, not emission limits, that are currently setting the limits and actively protecting communities from Marathon's pollutants. In contrast, evidenced by Marathon's own history of failed emissions monitoring, and we can cite this, nationwide, but some of that's happened here. Emissions data is often compromised by technical errors, inconsistent measurement practices, and failures to adequately self-report or monitor. This has placed the burden of enforcement on communities alongside state and federal agents for investigations. The removal of throughput limits would thus complicate enforcement and increase the potential for regulatory evasion by cost of doing business practices whereby fines are paid after pollutants are already in the air. There is simply no justification for putting Southwest Detroit at greater risk with less enforceable and less proactive pollution controls. Marketing this permit package with some pollution controls cannot mask the fact that this plan will increase pollution in overburdened neighborhoods, period. Given the shameful history of state regulatory failure to safeguard this community here in Southwest Detroit, from the emissions of Marathon and others, it is imperative that EGLE maintain its more enforceable throughput pollution limits and honor its commitment to environmental justice communities by rejecting this package of permits. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your comment. Teresa Landrum, you're the last person that I have a card for, so just keep in mind if anyone else in the room would like to make a comment, opportunity to do that, but I am going to go to any folks that we have online after Teresa is done with her. Go ahead whenever you're ready, Teresa.
Okay, Teresa Landrum, Southwest Detroit 4217 resident. I will submit written comments at a later date. So, but I have one comment and then I will I'd like to present some considerations to EGLE. My first comment is that, where's the comment? Let me find it. Oh, the comment is about the increased height of the stack. It going from 20 feet to 35 feet does not reduce the pollution, it just spreads it further, in my opinion, depending on the precipitation or the dryness or the velocity and the wind direction. Okay, so the comment I would like to say, and a criticism to EGLE, that allowing 3 separate companies to submit 3 separate permits and have a hearing on them at once is a challenge, and it shouldn't be legal, but you guys did it anyway. For community lay people to have to read through 3 separate companies, 3 separate minutes that are highly scientific, technical, and legal documents, it puts the community behind the 8 ball. Because we have to rely on the assistance of others that have that expertise to break it down in layman terms. So that's one criticism comment. And this is a consideration to EGLE. Consider indoor air pollution when you're modeling, because when you open windows, go outdoors, pollution comes out. And then we have to realize that we have workers that are being impacted by serious concentrations of air pollution inside of buildings if you don't have a great filtration system. And so my other consideration is that there have been many hearings that we've attended for other companies and on other issues. There should be a combined list for anybody that's within the area or has attended a meeting or made a comment. It should be one list, because you go for specific companies. If you attend the Marathon company's hearing, it just goes for that day and those people. But what about us attending a hearing for Communist Line? And we did one for EES Coke Battery. We also did one for Cleveland Cliffs. Those people and communities live in a radius. So EGLE should consider combining those lists, because everybody is impacted by air pollution, because there is no boundaries for air pollution. It blows everywhere. And so my last consideration, I hope, is that in modeling, that when modeling is being projected, that real-time data be also included in those modeling and projections. We should know what the pollution current standard or what emissions are at that time over the period of time that the permit is granted. Then thereafter, we should learn where there's been an increase and a decrease in that with real-time data. And then also, I want to talk about proposed pollution reduction. I'll submit a comment on that later, because I want to know how can a company propose to reduce pollution when they're going to ask for 100% capacity, output? And those are into my comments for now. Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much, Teresa. I appreciate it. Jim, do we have anybody online who wants to make a comment?
There's no one with their hand raised.
Okay, so just a reminder for folks online, you can use the hand icon to raise your hand, or if you are on the phone, press #2 to raise your hand. So anyone else in the room that would like to make a comment that we didn't call your name already? We'll give everybody just a little bit longer here. Jim, anything? Oh, after this. After this announcement. Psych. Me closing the hearing, last call for hands. Okay, with me closing the hearing? Okay. All right, so I just have to read a brief statement to close the hearing out, and then we'll go over a couple other things for the end of the meeting. So thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this hearing tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on June 3rd, 2024. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed, so thank you again. All right, I just have a couple other things to go over for everyone here. Okay, so talked a little bit about, thank you everybody for submitting official comments tonight. A few people said they're going to be submitting some in writing. Dr. Leonard, we have yours stamped in, so we got you there. Thank you for that. Like we mentioned earlier, we take comments by mail. We'll take them by email. You can call into the voicemail to leave us a comment as well. People like to do that. We take these on a napkin. We'll take them scrawled. I mean, no guarantees on my reading the handwriting, but we will take them in any way you would like to give them. And we always just, you know, coming here or doing this, you know, coming to listen and then doing a comment later, it doesn't weigh differently. You know, we take all the comments as they come in, and that will review all of the comments that we get before she makes her decision. A couple things about this slide. So a lot of information was out on the table. If you didn't grab something on the way in and you want to, feel free to grab it on the way out. But we've got some pieces of information. If you were listening, Andy talked about the technical fact sheet. Some other folks mentioned that that's the kind of like deeper dive into the rules and regulations and things like that related to these 3 permits. The proposed project summary is just a high-level overview. We did translate that proposed project summary into Spanish and Arabic, so if you know anyone who wasn't here this evening that reads in a different language, please feel free to take those with you and pass them on. The proposed permit terms and conditions are also on there, and then the links to the recording of this meeting will be on there in the next few days. It does take us a little bit to get those up there, but we will do that. So those can be found at michigan.gov/EGLE Air Public Notice, but you can also find a lot of information about Marathon from an EGLE perspective at michigan.gov/EGLE Marathon. So really just simple website to find that information on. I'll leave this up here for a few minutes. This is just the contact information from the folks that you heard tonight. They're still here, so if you have any questions or you want to have a one-on-one conversation, we have a little bit of time still to talk to folks. So please feel free to do that. We will send out a follow-up email. So if you provided an email on your way out, if you want some follow-up, you can send Andy a note. Andy, not to put you on the spot, but he'll forward that to me to make sure that you all get the follow-up email. We usually send one out that's just a link to the recording, reminders of when the comment period closes. One other thing that we usually do that we haven't mentioned, and Teresa, your comment made me think about this. We have a subscriber list it's like an email list that you can get articles and other information about air quality related things. It's not necessarily specific community related, it's more like in general. But for big controversial permits like this, we always do a an article through that subscriber list that says, hey, this is what happened. Here was the decision, here's where you can find more information, just to kind of close the loop on things. Y'all will be directly notified if we got your email address, so no big deal there. But if you wanted to sign up for that, it's just another way to kind of keep updated on things that are going on that you might be interested in. Appreciate the comments on combining the lists. That's definitely something that we've been talking about. So without further ado, I know people are taking pictures of this. We'll also share a copy of the slides in the email as well. So like I said, that might be in a day, a couple of days or so, hopefully by Friday. But any last questions, comments, concerns, not official comments, I should be clear, but any last words otherwise? Okay, all right, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate that, Jim. If you want to stop the virtual meeting, appreciate everybody participating tonight.